Hello, Lolcohol and chat. Let's talk about Lucky Hit.
Yay! What's
Uh,
up?
so Lucky Hit is the core of the broken speedrunning meta in Diablo 4.
Mm-hmm.
Here's how it works. Every skill has a base chance to be
Uh-huh.
a lucky hit. Usually for basic skills, this is somewhere between 30 and 40%, and for core skills, this is somewhere between 15 and 25%. That number can be modified by on-item multipliers. So for example, if I have a basic skill that has a 40% chance to be lucky, and I pick up 50% increased lucky hit chance, that
Ah.
skill now has 40 times 1.5 equals 60% chance to be lucky.
Okay.
On item procs of lucky hit are like a second roll. So you hit an enemy with Holy Bolt.
Uh-huh.
That hit is lucky, then it rolls the 8% chance to stun.
Oh. Oh. Okay.
So it's like a crit of a crit.
Oh, I see. I see. Okay, so yeah, like let's say I have a base 10% chance to lucky hit. That means that 10% of the time I'll get lucky, and then when I do get lucky, then I have an 8% chance for that to proc.
Correct.
So
Correct.
in that case, this would be like a 0.8% chance to stun today's enemies on hit.
Correct.
Okay.
And so
Interesting.
the reason it's worded as up to an 8.1% chance to daze on your item is
Mm-hmm.
because there are skills in the game that have extremely high base lucky hit chance, and therefore, with item modifiers, can exceed 100% chance to be lucky, which doesn't do anything other than guaranteeing that it's lucky. Like, there's no difference between a skill having a 100% chance to be lucky and having a 10 million% chance to be lucky. Both of
Right.
those just mean this skill is always lucky.
I see. And then it will be like, okay, so you always have an 8% chance to daze.
Correct.
Aha. Okay, that is totally different to what I thought it meant. Because I thought
Yeah,
this
and
was like,
so
okay.
And so to explain like the speedrun meta, in while you're leveling, now that you've like unlocked all these temper recipes are tiered like items are. When you're
Uh-huh.
low level, you have magic ones. When you're medium level, you have rare ones, and when you're in the end game, you get legendary ones.
Mm-hmm.
But those are account-wide unlocks. So the equivalent of twinking in Diablo 4 is using legendary tempers on low-level items.
Ah, I see. Okay.
And so and so because there's no way for me to prevent you from using account-wide unlocks, like there's no equivalent of fresh start, migrate all SSF in Diablo 4,
Mm.
speedruns allow you to temper, but the rule that the speedrun community has voted on is that when you start a brand new season, you unlock tempering for the first time at level 15, and so the speedruns mimic that by banning runs from tempering until level 15.
Ah, I see. I see. Okay.
So to give you some idea, if you're like thinking about increasing your EHP so you can jump up to higher difficulty tiers sooner,
Mm-hmm.
your character's base HP at level 1 is like 50 or 100.
Yeah.
And you can temper plus 140 max life onto every single defensive item.
Holy shit.
So
Okay.
like so for example, like if you think of an Act 1 character in PoE 2, you at the end of Act 1 you might have 200 to 300 base HP depending on your class, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're fighting Geonor. How broken would it be if you could just add 150 HP to your helm, chest, gloves, and boots?
Yeah, no, you'd be like unkillable. Just
Exactly. Like you'd fight Geonor with over 1,000 HP and like Lamau memes, right? Like it's a joke. Like you'd never need to look at ground loot ever again because you could just have an item filter that hides everything, take the white items that you get in like Clearfell, and then
yeah.
go kill Geonor with that. The offensive strategy in D4 speedrunning also works this way, where there's a temper recipe called Elemental Surge, which is completely useless in the endgame, but to give you an example, a typical like level 30 weapon might deal 200 DPS,
Okay.
and Elemental Surge says lucky hit up to a 40% chance to deal 4,800 elemental damage.
God damn. Okay. All right. So,
So
then you just kill the
so
boss.
if you stack lucky hit chance in campaign, and bear in mind that lucky hit is a base damage that gets multiplied by all your like on tree and item multipliers.
Uh-huh.
So for example, if I'm level 20 when I fight mid-campaign Andoriel, her total hit pool is 20,000 HP, and there's a rogue build in the rogue speedrun that can have a 40% chance to lucky hit, because you can cap your lucky hit chance, and therefore you have a 40% chance to activate that. And when you lucky hit, you deal 165,000 fire damage.
Okay, so
And her total HP is 20,000.
okay, so every third hit you just like delete the boss completely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct.
So how
So,
does it
like-
work on like rings? How does lucky hit work on rings? Does that increase your skill base chance or what?
So you have... Okay, so like the skill has a chance to be lucky.
Yeah, so Blessed
And
Hammer
that's-
is 24%, right?
Okay. And then if you have... The thing that's shown to you on tree is actually your lucky hit chance after item modifiers. So if you like unequipped all your skill tree and paragon and items,
Okay.
the lucky hit chance for that might be lower. I don't happen to know what Blessed Hammers is off the top of my head. But for example, you can get both flat and multiplicative bonuses to your skill's lucky hit chance as well.
Okay. All right.
So for example, like some of the very best endgame chase uniques give like plus 50% increased chance to lucky hit, in which case your item would go from like 20% chance to be lucky to 30% chance to be lucky.
Okay. Wait, let me just see if I... Oh, okay, so let's say on this, so this might have like base 24% lucky hit, and then I have like another 4% on my gear. Is that right?
Yeah, or you have 20% increased lucky hit chance.
Okay, I see. So this 8% chance to daze for 2 seconds isn't that good, because I'm lucky hitting 1 out of every 4 hits, and then 1 out of every 12 hits. 1 out of every 12 lucky hits will daze. So yeah.
In your particular case, no. However, I want to give you like another example in the end game so you can like wrap your head around how this is used in like actual builds. If you have an extremely high projectile count stacking build, so like the D4 equivalent of like Spark or something, right? Or like Spiral Volley or some other thing or Twister, something that stacks a huge number of projectiles, these small on-hit chance to activate things can add up to meaningful amounts of like resource recovery or stagger.
Okay.
In the end game, it's usually something that you use for like it's, how do I say this? In the end game, it's usually something that you use for like utility aspects of your build, not damage.
I see, okay. So I don't want to be having like
So-
a low chance to proc some stun that then when it does proc once every 50 hits gives me like increased damage. Yeah, that doesn't really work.
Usually you'd want like all your different forms of stagger.
Yeah.
Like when you fight bosses, the way that you how do I say this? So like if you're fighting some lair boss and it's really hard to apply a lot of on-hit stagger effects to bosses. So for example, like the boss can be dazed, but if you have a thing that only activates when the boss is stunned or immobilized, they're not going to be stunned or immobilized because they have stun meter build up and it takes longer to do that, like heavy stun in PoE 2.
Right. Okay.
And so against mobs, these low chance to hit effect things will be fine, but against bosses it'll be really hard. And so what tends to be more effective is like is you use these lucky hit chance to stagger things, where I'm using stagger to refer to like daze, stun, freeze, immobilize, knock down, like all the different versions.
Right.
You use those when you have some high attack speed, like high
Projectile count.
build.
Yeah, okay.
So for example, like like personal opinion time, the most fun skill in the entire game is a Spiritborn skill called Quill Volley, where you like throw out lightning feathers that go out in a cone shape, and then depending on what items you have, they come back to you. You can throw out 12 feathers, and that means that every single skill activation you are dealing 24 hits to the enemy.
Ah, I see.
And then you can stack attack speed to get it up to depending on how like min-maxed you get about your attack speed, you can get like 10 skills per second. So you can deal 240 damage instances per second to the enemy.
Okay. All right. So
And
that.
so, like, in those cases, like, a tiny chance to daze would mean, like, functionally every time I hit the enemy, I am doing some amount of daze buildup, or some amount of stun buildup, or some amount of resource recovery.
Yeah. And that's happening
Whereas
a
for
lot. Yeah, for me, this is like not really procking that much.
And so, like, for you right now, even when if you think about, like, a tanky lair boss, where you've sat on top of the boss for 4 seconds or 6 seconds pressing Holy Hammer,
Yeah.
you're only going to be hitting the boss like at most 4 to 6 times per second.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm hitting the boss 240 times per
Yeah.
second.
Okay. All right. That makes
Like,
a lot of
it's
sense.
just a different amount of scaling there.
That makes a hell of a lot more sense. Okay.
And so the reason that there are so many like little bottlenecks in the funnel of like how lucky hit is calculated is because this is like the only place where the D4 designers like fucking cooked with a system that is mathematically interesting, where they go like, oh, this is OP but only a little bit. We're gonna change the base skill chance to hit from 24 to 22%. And that means that like after all the multiplicative bonuses, it's like they can really tune how much they want you to get resource cost recovery or whatever from this system. So like this is extremely confusing. This is the most Crimson Cast skill design of like any game ever, right? They're like, we made it so that it multiplies by the thing and the blah blah blah, and then you have to activate it, and then when it activates, it rolls over the list of possible things, and then it activates again, and like no one understands it, like no one.
Yeah.
Like I've talked to people who are guide authors for like major guide sites, and I've been like,
you're trying to explain it to them, and they don't get it. You explained that
Like
pretty
imagine
well.
if you were talking to like the D4 equivalent of some super technical guide author person like Jungron, who knows every little nuanced thing, and they still
They don't get
use
that.
this because it's confusing as hell. Like, however, the speedrun tech relies on this super intensely because the D4 equivalent of twinking is that you have endgame tempers on a low-level character. And so if you don't have a friend to boost you, I can just tell you, put max life on all of your basic gear, put movement speed on your amulet and your boots, and temper elemental surge on your weapon, and then like every 6th hit, you'll just be one-shotting bosses
God
and
damn.
rares.
But that's just for leveling,
Like, no-
right?
Yeah. And so like even if you have the worst weapon ever, 1 in 6 hits, you're just gonna like delete the boss. So like there are clips on my Twitch from when I was doing a lot of D4 speedrunning where there are like endgame campaign bosses, and if I get the first hit activation, which is like a 1 in 3 chance for some of the builds, I just like walk up to Lilith and she's still monologuing, and then her HP just is 0 now.
Okay. All right. That is
So, like-
very cool.
And so it actually like trivializes a lot of D4 speedrunning stuff because like you no longer need to understand anything. Like you just put this on your gear and then you just walk in there and like try an attack speed stack, and then you hit the enemy and it activates, and like that's it. It's all over.
GG dead.
Yeah, so like for the quote unquote like pseudo SSF D4 player who's leveling an alt, this is like the twinking system, but it's like not tutorialized well, and it's extremely hard to understand, and it's like bad.
It's bad. Well, I mean, you explained that really well. That made sense.
Yeah, but also like you are the sort of person who writes guides for Mobalytics and spends time in PoB, and so when I go, it's a crit of a crit, and it hits this and then this and then this, then
Yeah.
you get it. But for the typical like D4 dad who's just booting up the max roll tier list and picking up whatever is in A or S tier that looks fun, like
It's a bit
if I start
much.
going like, yeah, right, because the audience is so different. Like the typical PoE 2 player, if I make a 6-minute YouTube video about this, would understand it perfectly and forever,
Yeah.
right? It's just an audience difference between the two games.
Okay.
Right.
No, that's cool.
And that's partially because like D4's UI in general, with a couple of exceptions, is better at tutorializing game systems than PoE 2's, and certainly better than PoE 1's. And so that means that like a lot of this more technical stuff that isn't tutorialized well is just like no one ever understands.
No one. Okay, they don't really engage with it because I totally. Where does it explain how it works? Does this game have like something similar to PoE, where you can hover over stuff?
Yeah, so if you take like if you go into your skill tree right now and you hover over any skill that has an underlined keyword,
Yes, but I
it'll
don't.
just be a gray box underneath that. You also can open your settings menu. So like Holy Bolt doesn't have anything, but like
There we go. Like
Blessed
Holy
Hammer
Light
also
Aura.
doesn't.
Judgment.
Yeah,
where it
Holy Light
explains-
Aura, for example, Judgment marks an enemy for 3 seconds, dealing 80% damage after it expires. Right. And so a lot of these keywords, especially the like crowd control effects,
Yeah.
and also like player statuses that are anti-crowd control. So for example, like unstoppable versus immune are two different statuses the player that can have that prevent different types and amounts of crowd control.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much like there is a little bit tutorialization in the form of like if you hover things you can do that, right?
Right.
And then there's also like an in-game like glossary in your settings menu, but it's not very good.
Okay. In the settings menu.
Yeah. And then there are a couple of like you would love talking to Macro Bio Boy. He's a max roller who is like the class lead for Necromancer in this game.
Okay.
And he's also like a D2 speedrunner, and he's the best. And he's like very precise in how he explains things. And so when people have technical questions about D4 stuff, there are a lot of community creators like that who do a really good job of like going through things line by line.
I know that guy. Yeah.
So
Okay. No, I mean, this game's been really fun. The only thing I wish they'd like sort out the ping, get us some local servers, but it's like, I don't know how long I'll play for, but up until this point, it's been really, really good.
I think that D4 like I think that D4 is now in an interesting position where since they've added war plans,
Yes, yeah.
they have so D4 has had like some cool seasons. It's been hit or miss and opinions are mixed on a lot of the seasonal mechanics, but like most seasons have had some kind of endgame activity. And those have varied from like the equivalent of a real like PoE 2 style league mechanic where it's like you do the breach thing, you get the breach splinters that lets you go and fight the breach boss. Like
Right.
that kind of a thing. And some of them have just been like now there are vampires everywhere and
Yeah.
the rare monster modifiers are more and different. Like it's not really a league mechanic, but the ones that have been good have been really good. And so at least in my opinion, in terms of like you get into the content fast, you blow everything up fast, you progress fast. But then they've also had borrowed power systems. So to give you some idea, like the charm system in the game right now,
Yeah.
although it's permanent, has the same like vibe as the sort of borrowed power systems that they've done in the past.
That makes
Here's a new menu. Slot things in, that's it. And then
Yeah.
that goes away and doesn't go core at the end of the season.
Right. But they do something
And-
that's familiar. Yeah. Okay.
And so, like, for example, there was Season of the Borrowed Boss Powers, where the first time that you killed endgame bosses, one of their core skills was now a thing that you could add as a skill yourself.
Oh, that's cool. And
So,
that's
for example,
gone?
like, yeah, so, like, for example, you know how when you fight the campaign version of Mephisto, he has the, like, in the big oily black pool thing, he shoots out,
Yes.
like, little centipede tendrils. Imagine if when you killed that campaign version of Mephisto, it now said every single time that you cast a core skill, 50% chance to send out one of Mephisto's little centipedes.
That's cool. That's very, very cool. Okay.
Like, that sort of system exists, but they tend to be, like, ridiculously OP, because the vibe of Diablo 4 is like, congratulations, you unlocked the endgame system. You now delete everything. Like, there's
Yeah.
no ramp.
It
And
wants to get
so-
you there, right?
And so now that D4 has war plans, I think that that framing of like Atlas Tree Light is going to allow game designers to like much more robustly bring the activities portion in.
Mm-hmm.
And the rework to the skill tree means that now they have more okay, so like very few of the season mechanic activities have gone core. The most recent one is actually in season 4 or 5 when we had Infernal Hordes.
Okay.
And we
Yeah.
are now on season 13. So like essentially nothing goes core. And when it does go core, it's a big deal
But now they can actually start adding it because it's not
because they have
right.
war plans. The other thing that happens is when the borrowed powers go core, they do it in the form of legendary aspects. So, for example, like right now, those boots you're hovering, Boneweave Treads of Accursed Touch.
Yeah.
Accursed Touch is from Season of the Vampire, and that was a vampiric power that was like on its own baby skill tree, and then now it's a legendary aspect.
I see.
And so a lot of the reshuffling that occurred in the skill trees, if you're like a big D4 nerd, you'll recognize almost all the on-tree skill modifiers that happen, where you can change the core functionality or shape of a skill, used to be legendary powers. And that means that now that all the skill modifier type legendary powers are on the tree, now we have more design space for legendary aspects to have borrowed powers go core as legendary aspects. And so they've like reshuffled a lot of the design space for things, but it means that the long-term ability for interesting season mechanics that the player base likes, both the powers and the activities, are now more able to migrate to core in more interesting ways. And so if the designers did that on purpose, and if this is... Because the player base has constantly been asking, is this going to go core? I really like this system. Is it going to go core?
Yeah.
Now we can take, like, borrowed power stats and put them onto charms and legendary aspects, and we can take seasonal activities and put them into your war plans and give you the opportunity to spec into them. If that happens, right now, D4 mid to good, and long-term, D4 good to great.
That'd be great. I would love that. I would love it if we have like more than one game. I mean, even this is fun enough that like not having to do the campaign again, I would be down to play this again. So far, although I'm still only like a little bit of the ways in.
Yeah.
But okay.
But like, the other thing that D4 does that's interesting. Okay, name 2 League mechanics in PoE 2. Any 2, doesn't matter.
Expedition Abyss.
Okay, so imagine if you want to kill Kulamak of the Far Isles, and that's a version of Kulamak that can only be accessed by killing base Kulamak, which drops you a key, and killing Expedition Boss, which gives you a key, and that allows you to unlock a new boss that has Expedition mechanics and Abyss mechanics.
Okay.
D4 has a ladder where there are like endgame activities like Hell Tides, where you kill the Blood Maiden and you get blood, and that lets you kill Zir. And you open chests and that gives you steel, and that lets you kill Grigor. And then once you've killed Grigor and Zir, both of those drop materials that let you then jump up to a higher tier boss. Sort of like how Citadels in PoE 2 give you kill the Citadel boss, which is an entry level boss, and that lets you jump up to the Arbiter of Ash.
Right. Okay.
In D4, there's like an entry tier tied to the activities, and then once you kill those entry tier bosses, you then jump up, and then there's a third tier where you can jump up again.
Okay.
And so the boss laddering in D4, now that they've like very aggressively uncrangled the ability to farm the bosses, it used to be bad, now it's fine. Now the boss ladder is like, once you're on the boss ladder, you can stay there. And so you're kind of in the mid game right now. You finished the campaign and leveling, your build is mostly online, and now you need to farm war plans and activities to get all your legendaries and get your build online. And then once you do that, you get to bosses. And then once you're in bosses, unless you want to, for the most part, you won't need to go back to Helltides and Pit and whatever, because now you're just climbing the boss ladder to get better and better chase uniques.
Okay.
And that system right now, where like what you're doing, I would call the mid game, is like an interesting design.
Yeah.
And I think that PoE 2 does a pretty similar thing where like maps progression is like quote unquote the mid game. Like if you're not doing T15s yet, you're in the mid game. You're out of the campaign, you're no longer in the early game, but like T8s is not end game.
No,
right?
not yeah. You need to be doing those like highest tier. Okay. So I'm like in the I don't know, like probably white maps equivalent right now.
Yeah. So like once you hit Paragon 100, that's the equivalent of doing unjuiced T15s, and once you hit Paragon 200, that's the equivalent of like juiced T15s and pinnacles.
Okay.
Like you're the PoE 2 equivalent of being level 70 right now.
Right. Well, that's very cool. I'm
So like
very stoked to get into this. Yeah.
D4's systems design is actually pretty good. It's just held back by like absolutely atrocious combat feeling.
Yeah.
Compared to PoE 2.
That was one of the things that I noticed immediately. It was like, dude, PoE's combat is on another level. It is so much like tighter, snappier. You like feel it, whereas this feels just pretty much the same as D3, in my opinion.
Yep. Like my dream game, I think that a lot of the, how do I say this? A lot of the build and theory crafting of PoE 2 is just clearly superior. Like,
Yeah.
support gems are more interesting and you can do more interesting stuff. And like, you and I could go, hey, what if I just, for no reason at all, wanted to take Fireball and convert it to physical so it could do poison hit, and then that would corrode armor, and then do on-armor explosion, and then we could get, like, all of that, and then we could get armor explosion chaining from Fireball. Yeah, sure, I could make a physical Fireball build if I wanted to, right? Mechanics for that exist. And in D4, you're much more on the rails about what your choices are. And so, like, the theorycraft side of character creation, PoE 2 clearly superior. But there are activities in D4, and there are, like, activity customization options in D4 that are, like, worth thinking about. Of, like, if this weren't held back by the combat and the, like, PvE balance of, like, my character being so OP so fast,
Yeah.
would this system be good? And the
Okay.
answer in some cases, in my opinion, is like the system's pretty good. Like, it's a pretty interesting system.
That makes
So-
sense. Right. Yeah, good system, just like the foundation of the game is kind of holding it back a bit. And luckily the people from GGG are not scared to take ideas that they think are good and then just implement it. Because why not?
I think that Lucky Hit would be like on-hit effects in PoE 2 at the like implementation. How do you do the math of how the engine computes the on-hit effect probability in would be very interesting. Like,
Yeah, because
or
it
like,
does.
or like,
The thing that's interesting about it, like you said, is that it adds a layer to skill mechanic viability. As in, like, you could have a maybe not that great skill, but it hits very rapidly. And then if you combine it with XYZ lucky hit procs, which like things like that sort of exist, but I see what you mean.
there are also some subtleties of like, for example, like here's an interesting question, right? So you and I have both played Endgame Grenades.
Yeah.
If you were playing, you can imagine two different players, both in softcore, where one wants to play, I don't know, some item that goes like if Hyres didn't have the evasion doubling effect, right? You could imagine someone going, "Oh, Hyres gives me big gain and does all this other stuff, but then I don't get to wear a gigantic evasion deflection stacking chest with T1 mods," right? And so that means that then you have to ask the question, do I want to give up some evasion and deflection stacking in order to get the offensive benefits of Hyres, right?
Right.
So the fact that evasion stacks diminishingly, where my evasion chance goes up and up and up, and so my chance to evade goes from I evade half of attacks to I evade 3/4 of attacks to I evade 90% of attacks, and so on, means that then there are interesting player agency and player playstyle choices where you and I can both completely understand the end game, and I can just prefer having a slightly higher amount of evasion or armor, and you can prefer having a high raise, and both of those are valid. And a mirror tier evasion stacking chest and a well rolled high raise do different things for my build.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
The reason that capped res in games bothers me is because it means that there are fewer opportunities for me to do the same thing with resistances. Where I can imagine, for example, if resistances were uncapped in PoE 2, and instead we had fire resistance rating instead of fire resistance percentage, then I would be able to say things like, oh, on Abyss League launch, ground degen ignites are killing everybody. I can give up some rarity suffixes on my rings to stack more
Right.
fire resistance
Okay. So you're
in excess of the cap. provided that I can never reach 100% fire resistance because it stacks with diminishing multiplier instead of stacking up to 75% and then I'm done, fuck you, unless you use the very limited tools to overcap things.
Yes.
It just means that my EHP against fire hits or my fire max hit, I can make the choice to give up my defensive item suffixes to then solve specific problems related to the content that I have.
Yeah, whereas in
So, like-
PoE, it's almost like the game assumes you have 75% all res, and it's like balanced around that, and if you don't, you get screwed, but then it's very hard to like then customize your defenses beyond that, unless you start going for like max res.
And so, exactly.
Okay.
And so that means that, like, in the case of like evasion or armor or ES, there are plenty of choices where, oh, I'm doing a calling strike build. If I give up some like armor on my helm on my calling strike shield wall witch hunter, I can use Mira's Uxor, which increases my calling strike threshold. So I can get an offensive benefit and give up a defensive benefit. Or I can give up some rarity and get some defensive suffix, right? But once you reach the cap, that just becomes uninteresting to do. So I think that capped systems reduced player agency in a way that bothers me, where in general, modern ARPGs, and by modern I mean anything from D2 onwards, like, those, that we tend to have pretty good physical defensive systems in this way, where you can ask questions of like, do I want to give up, you know, my evasion stacking gloves to wear 0.1 Hands of Wisdom in action?
Right, okay.
And your choices might be different between hardcore and softcore, and between what different league mechanic you're pursuing, especially in PoE 1, where like specializing into a particular league mechanic like really affects what you want your build to do, right?
I think...
And
okay.
we don't have the same thing for resistances, and that annoys me. Like, what if going into Abyssal Depths, everything in there did like poison, and so overcapping your chaos res was like super valuable for like people who are farming ultra endgame abyss stacked maps.
Right, yeah,
Right?
we were talking about this on the other day, where it's like things should have like more discrete damage types, so that if you are able to do that thing, if you want to focus on doing that thing, then you can specialize in like building defensively for it. But the problem with PoE is that you have to be ready for everything always. So you have to like have all your bases covered no matter what, because I think in large part to do with like rare affixes, mob types and stuff. So
yeah, like you could imagine if I get like a fire res stacking ring, like I get a ruby ring that has like T1 fire res suffix, there's no circumstance where I'd ever want to wear two of those, because two well-rolled ruby rings with fire res would give me like a combined total of like, with appropriate catalysts and whatever, it'd be like 120% total fire res just on those two items. And so I'd like literally never want to actually wear that. Whereas if you have the same thing happen where each ring gives 50% fire res, but those stack multiplicatively, so that way the 50% times 50% reduction results in 3/4 physical damage, fire damage resist. And then if I get another 50% piece, now I have 87.5 resist. And then if I get another piece, now I have 92% resist, and so on and so forth. That means that the EHP value of stacking additional fire res is always the same. And so I can always choose to get more and more upgrades to my fire resist, because goddamn these Abyss degens are killing me. And I'm like aggressively adding the community team on Twitter to tell them to detune the Abyss stuff. And in the meantime, fire res stacking rings become tradable and interesting. And if I really want to engage Abyss content, I know that I can craft around that. And that means that there's more player agency and more interesting stuff. Which mathematical system you introduce, like someone in the chat,
yeah, like Nikki
like someone in the
said,
chat is saying like, I prefer the percent-based system with more accessible percent values and maybe lower expected cap, more accessible percent max mods. That's one implementation. I'm giant diminishing returns enjoyer, where like, just let me stack it forever, but like let it be a logarithmic system where I can't reach 100%. But if you want more accessible percent max mods, that's a perfectly valid alternate opinion. I just think that like the soft cap being so firm in PoE 2 sucks.
Yeah.
Like it's bad. I don't like it.
75. I wonder, like, I think you would be really interested. It would be impossible for you to really dig into it, but if there's a way that you could look into like PoE 1 defensive systems, because I think there's a lot of things in there that are kind of doing what you're saying, but they're much more hidden and unobvious than just saying like get a lot more of physical resistance, which is kind of the equivalent of getting armor. But I'm thinking of almost like ways that you can, let's say, max your fire res, like push your fire res cap up, and then convert cold and lightning damage taken as fire.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
Yeah,
but then again, it's leaning into that idea of like you need to be ready for everything. It's like you're not just saying, oh, I want to be really good at resisting fire to do this mechanic. It's more, I need to have ultra capped fire, cold, lightning, chaos, and this is one way to do it. Yeah.
So for like, I'll give you an example of something you can do in D4 right now, like with your current build. If I pick 2 different endgame bosses and I say, okay, Lolcohol, your goal today is to get to Torment 4, and within Torment 4, I want you to go kill Torment Lilith, and within Torment 4, I want you to go kill Torment Grigor. Grigor is a boss who deals nearly entirely physical and lightning, and Lilith is a boss who deals nearly entirely physical and shadow. And what that means is, if I just tell you, hey, putting sockets into your accessories and putting amethysts into all your stuff gives you shadow resist, and putting topazes in gives you lightning resist, because purple gem, yellow gem, shadow res, lightning res.
Right.
What that means is now, if you know that your character is in progression and you're not quite ready for everything yet, you have the optionality to just put more shadow damage in right now because of how the socketing system works. And the same thing is true in the Ultra endgame. Like in PoE 2, if I'm at capped fire res, there's no additional system where I can just put additional desert runes in my gear and get value for that if I'm going to go fight a boss that deals primarily fire damage.
Yeah, then you start needing to look at other systems of like, how do I then get like generic elemental damage reduction from like in PoE, like endurance charges will give you elemental and physical damage reduction. Yeah. So
like percent physical damage taken as fire is like a mod that exists in PoE 2 right now, and we're going to get more of it, I'm sure, as the game gets more fleshed out. But right now, a lot of it is locked behind ascendancies, and I wish the actual core defensive system that's just generically available, like...
Yeah.
Like, what if Desert Runes gave, like, in the language of someone in chat, what if Desert Runes gave plus 2% max fire res, in addition to giving plus 14% base fire res?
That'd be cool.
Well, then there would be cases where, like, yeah, my res is capped, but I still want to put a Desert Rune in for the purpose of increasing that cap, because I'm going to go fight whatever boss that deals fire damage, or whatever boss that deals lightning damage, or whatever boss that deals cold or chaos, or whatever. So.
I wonder if they'll do that. I'm very, very curious about this next patch, man. See if they're going to flip the game on its head, especially in terms of itemization in the tree. Because, yeah, I feel like those are currently some of the weakest points.
Like, I'll just draw it and send it to you right now, so we could do this whole exercise on stream. Here, I think I've done this. I think I've done this for you before. Just give me 30 seconds, and I'll draw something and send it to you.
Go for it.
I ask people this all the time. So, if you could choose between your character power feeling like one of the 3 curves that I'm about to send you.
This was one I thought about.
Right? Like, so I'm gonna give you 4 options here, and I'm coloring them different colors so we can talk about it. Which one of these 4 progression curves, drawn super hastily in Microsoft Paint, is actually how you want your character to feel in terms of your, like, time invested or your knowledge or your currency invested or whatever, versus like how strong your character feels? And that thing...
Yeah. Is there a right answer?
Is there a right answer? No. But I think that a lot of people... What the problem that exists if I... Here, I'll show you...
This is like the D4 curve, right? this top green one, kinda. Maybe
Well,
not.
what happens in a lot of modern ARPGs is that it's actually none of these things.
Yeah?
It's a secret other thing that I am adding to the graph and sending to you again.
Secret other thing.
So, like, what actually happens is instead of the green line, you get this white line, where you hit a cap and then your character stops progressing, period.
Ah, okay.
And so,
okay.
so like, you, like, the early, like, gaining portion of that white line can be, you know, any shape. It doesn't have to be a line. It can be an exponential. But, like, a capped system means, like, I keep feeling better and better and better and better and better, and then I hit a cap, and then I'm completely bored immediately.
Yep.
There's nothing I can do. Fuck me. Build over.
Yeah, yeah, you can't push your build, and also, at what point do you feel like you need to? Like, because something that can happen is, like, you can hit the content cap, as in, like, the hardest content in the game is halfway through this line, and then you don't even feel incentivized to go to the top, which could be a good thing if that halfway point is, you know, like, I don't know, after playing for like 100 hours or something like that. But if it's after 20 hours, yeah, then you're gonna like just quit. You're just gonna bounce out.
What's more interesting to think about in this system, though, and that I want to like call out, is that 75% fire res and 50% fire res are like the difference between having 25% fire res and 50% fire res is way smaller than the difference between 50 and 75. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Okay, I see.
If I have 100 HP and I have 25% fire res, then it takes like a hit of 133 to kill me.
Yeah. Okay.
If I have 50% fire res, it takes a hit of 200 to kill me. And if I have 75% fire res, it takes a hit of 400 to kill me.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So my EHP goes from 133 to 200, which is a 50% gain, if I jump from 25 to 50. But my EHP doubles if I go from 50 to 75.
Right.
And that means that tiny amounts of change in your fire res in endgame provide enormous amounts of survivability difference. Like the difference between 66% fire res and 75% fire res is another addition of your entire base HP, which is like, here's another way to think about it. The difference between 0 fire res and 50% fire res is the same as the difference between 66% fire res and 75% fire res.
What? Oh. Wow. Okay. And then what's the difference between like 75 and 90 then?
No. It's actually not that.
Then it's not as dramatic. Okay. Well, I mean, it is,
like,
but it's
if
not
you have 90%
that
fire res, you have 1,000 fire max hit in the example that we're talking about. Right? But what that means is, right now, tiny additions, if you're close to the current cap, tiny percentage point additions to your fire res give enormous differences in your EHP. Whereas if you designed a system that were multiplicative, where like every time you pick up fire res, it gives you 30% multiplicative reduction, you would go from having like every increased amount of rating would be worth the same amount. And that means that you'd still at some point reach a practical point at which stacking additional fire resistance no longer matters. But if you think of some ultra scaling endgame system, like the example of a pinnacle boss that deals a particular damage type, or a scaling system like Delve, where the deeper you go, the more you take, or in D4 the Pit, which scales well beyond the practical difficulty that your character can achieve, then like overcapping and overcapping and overcapping and overcapping to have higher and higher hits that correspond to particular damage types can be more interesting.
Okay, that makes sense. Right.
So like, essentially, like appropriately logarithmically designed systems can result in like the player always having some amount of progression to do, including like seeking out better divine rolls on mirror tier gear. Like, if you played SSF, this is a silly example, but like, suppose that I locked you in a room and I never let you play like anything but PoE 2 standard ever again. At a certain point, progressing your gear, you would have found multiple mirrors, and you would have crafted a T1 chess piece that has the 3 best prefixes and the 3 best suffixes.
Yeah.
And you would still have like multiple months of farming divines until you hit the 1 in 100 million divine to roll every mod perfectly. So you would mirror your chess piece and leave 1 copy in stash and just divine that item over and over again. Right?
Yeah. Okay.
Because you would want to find like the perfect rolls. And then you'd want to
interesting.
lock it and corrupt it and so forth. And so every mirror drop would then become another chance to like make another copy and try to over corrupt that and so forth.
God damn. Okay. That's very interesting.
And so like physical defenses, if I locked you in a room and never let you play anything but PoE 2 standard with no updates ever for years, your physical defenses would in principle have years worth of progression. And your resistances would be done on day 2.
Yeah. But then you need the content that scales past that to incentivize you pushing. Yeah, so you're saying like in D4 it has that with the pit. So it has a potential where it's like the content is it infinitely scaling on the pit?
No, but it's well beyond what it other than bugged builds in most season, like literally not possible to achieve the maximum pit level. So like if you had perfect rolled everything and played like an absolute demon, the theoretically achievable max DPS isn't enough to clear the pit before the timer runs out.
Wow. Okay, so then you do have that incentive to just like push, and you're not held back by like a resistance cap or something. Huh.
Yeah. Also, by the way, to answer a point that's being made in chat, I don't want people to be able to achieve 90% fire resist easily. I am making a point about the shape of the equation, and you can choose the scaling parameter to make it like, for example, right now you can achieve 75% resist on like day 2 of the league for most players, or like I'll say 20 hours playtime. You can get your resistances capped and into maps. And what I'm saying is, you could make it to achieve that particular amount of resistance. You can make it 1 day versus 10 days versus 10 years. I just want the system to exist to have the softer diminishing returns curve. And the question of how long we want progression to be to achieve any particular amount of defensive resistance is a separate question. There's a mathematical point about this as well, which is if I have a diminishing return system, the balance designer, Zaki, sitting in the offices in Auckland, New Zealand, deciding how hard Jamanra can be, can have a more accurate understanding of how survivable the player is going to be, and therefore how hard I should make Jamanra hit. Because right now, with the percentage-based system, if you happen to get 2 topaz rings, you can have 75% lightning resist, and if I happen to not get any topaz rings, I can have 10% resist, and that means that you are 3.5 or 4 times as survivable as I am, and that means that there is no hit that will threaten you that won't one-shot me, and there is no hit that will be merely threatening to me that won't be irrelevant to you.
So how does having the uncapped system change that? Like, what if you just didn't find, if Topaz Ring gave you like 100 lightning resistance, like as a number?
So to give you an example, if I have the standard amount of resistance available on an item be, say, 10%, that means that my EHP goes from being like 100 to being 111 to being 123 to being 134 because I'm multiplying by a factor of 1.1 every time that I gain. And that means that the difference between having 3 lightning resist items and having 1 lightning resist item is a difference of 30 or 40% in my EHP, which means that the fight might be really, really hard with none of those, and it might be still challenging but beatable if I get to 30%.
Okay, so are you saying
and
that
so the difference between like the good RNG system and the bad RNG outcome is, instead of it being like completely impossible to like completely like I can turn my monitor off and still win, right? Which is the case right now with lightning resist against Act 2 Jamanra, right? If you get 60% resist and I get 0, your EHP is 3 times mine, and that means that if we both have, say, 500% HP, 500 base HP, in order for him to threaten you, he needs to deal a max hit of 1500, And in order for him to threaten me, he needs to deal a max hit of 500. A max hit of 500 against you does like less than a third of your total HP, and therefore you don't care. You'd face tank it happily. Like, who cares?
No problem. Okay, so the difference would be like, how would that look? So is it almost like you balancing the game based on the assumption that the player has? I don't even. I feel like I'm almost there.
In your last couple of campaign runs, before you got to say,
GNR? It's a good one with a cold res.
Sure. Before you get to, well, I want to choose something slightly later in campaign. So let's talk about Ketzuli, the boss in Sun Temple in Act 3.
The fire res.
Because he deals fire damage.
Fire damage.
Okay.
Yeah.
Between the start of your run on a league start or a fresh start and Ketzuli, how many different ruby rings do you find?
You find a couple, right?
Between 1 and 4?
Yeah.
Right? That means that in the worst league start scenario, you end up with 1, and in the best league start scenario, you end up with 4. Right?
Okay.
What that means is, I then, being someone on the combat balance team, Zaki, when I'm thinking about the hit that needs to be dealt by Ketzuli, if I want the fight to feel still engaging but somewhat easy, so that way the resists feel meaningful to the player who's in the good case, the player who's traded, the player who has more crafting knowledge, I then want a hit that deals, say, 50 to 60% of that player's HP. And for the player who is in the bad RNG case, or who knows less about crafting or trading, that player still has a chance to survive, so I want it to deal, say, 80% of their HP. That's possible if and only if you do not use linearly adding percentages. Because otherwise, a player that deals 50% of the HP for the good RNG case, or for the good crafting place, and will deal like dramatically more than that, like 2 or 3 times that amount to the player in the bad case. Which means if they have the same HP approximately, you literally can't have that possum. The fight will either be defensively trivial or defensively impossible, if you want that to be the case. And so if I instead have, like, every time you find a ring, it gives you a 1.2x multiplier to your EHP. If you have 2 ruby rings equipped, your fire damage resist goes from 500, your naked amount, to 600, 500 times 1.2, to 720. Right? 500 times 1.2 times 1.2 is 720.
Okay.
The other player would then have an HP where they have no fire resist, and their fire max hit is 500. So then I want a hit that deals like 80% of the naked player's max HP. So I want a 400 max hit. If your fire max hit in the good case, where you're wearing the 2 rings, is 720, 400 out of 720 is a little over half your HP. Still a sizable, meaningful hit that you want to dodge, but now you get to have, like, that's a hit you can shrug off with a good flask. Whereas 400 against your max hit of 500 is a big threatening hit that is likely to kill you unless you're already at full HP when it occurs.
Right.
So multiplicative diminishing returns, like if we take the same example now and we give the one player 40% fire resist and one player 0% fire resist, now the hit goes from being 500 to 300 instead of 500 to... it goes from 400 to 240.
40, yeah.
And that means that now the hit is below half of my HP. And so, like, the math examples of what percentages you tune and so forth changes, but long story short, if you have adding percentage resistances, it makes it extremely difficult for the fire resist to simultaneously feel meaningful and for combat to remain engaging during progression.
So, having the flat number, how would you... Because you could run into a similar issue where it's like, oh, I didn't find any flat fire resistance.
Mm-hmm.
How then does that affect the balance? Or don't you just end up in the same problem, but it's just like, oh, I didn't find my ruby ring that gives me like 50 flat fire resistance, which like equates to, depending on how much fire res I already have, like a percentage. Mm-hmm. Oh, I see. Okay, so you're saying... Basically, if you find the 1 ruby ring, if you're unlucky, that would give you like 50 flat fire resistance, which would, let's say, equate to 20% fire damage reduction. But then if you found a second one, that gives you like 50 fire resistance. like a flat number, that number on top would then be like the diminishing returns already immediately kick in.
So like,
so you go from like 20%
so like,
fire damage reduction to like 25.
so to give you like a good example from PoE 2 speedrunning, if you think about, like I'll give you a real example. If I find 2 sapphire rings during my playthrough and a tiny amount of additional cold resistance on gear, 10 or 20% in total across all my items, I can hit the cold res cap, right? What that means is that when I go fight the prisoner in the abandoned prison, the high roll of his main spear slam is 1100 damage. Okay?
Okay.
If I have no fire res that will kill my character, even my Act 4 progressed character that's in the zone level might have a max HP pool of 1100 at that point in the campaign. If I get the good RNG case, I can take my speedrun character, my level 33 character that's min-maxed for damage only with no defense on tree at all, and I can face tank that hit because 75% resist against 1100 max hit means I'm taking like 300 damage.
Right. Okay.
And so the difference between the good and bad RNG case is that the character who's 20 levels underleveled goes from being one shot to being happily able to face tank Act 4 bosses.
Right.
Which means that if I'm aware of what my resistances are in PoE 2 right now, the run-to-run variance for like a league start player or for a speedrunner or anyone else in a fresh start circumstance is so large that in some circumstances the boss is impossible unless I know all the mechanics, which the new player won't know, or completely trivial because my items make me like, and then I no longer need to do all of the beautiful boss mechanics. I no longer need to be able to do anything like that.
Yeah. It's the same with the weapon damage. I also feel like that with the scaling right now, where it's like boss fight either trivial or extremely difficult. Huh.
Yeah, and so part of the problem is that a lot of the diminishing return systems that exist in ARPGs are not modern ARPG designers, because of the live service model, have to sustain player interest in the game for much longer. And so systems that exist with friction that are disliked by the players, the player base will exert a lot more pressure on the game designers than is true in the Diablo 2 era of games, including like Titan Quest and Diablo 1. Whereas right now, for example, in PoE 2 we had accuracy and chance to miss as a mechanic for ranged skills in 0.1 and 0.2, and it was disliked so much that right now your functional chance to miss is so low that essentially no bow player is stacking accuracy unless they are specifically playing Amazon.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Right? And so what was supposed to be the case, and what was the case in, for example, Diablo 2, and for that matter, in even earlier RPGs, like, I'm not even talking about video games at this point, like, in Dungeons and Dragons 2nd edition, right? Like, I'm talking about the vestigial history before we even had D1. Those chance to miss systems mean that there was the additional marginal value of getting, like, +1 to your hit rolls in D&D or getting plus 100% attack rating in Diablo 2 continued to be increasingly valuable, and accuracy is now irrelevant at all times because these sorts of systems are hard to sustain unless you have either extremely good like leadership and tutorialization so the player base understands why the diminishing return is good, which is really hard to do without extremely clear-minded leadership on the part of like the game design team at GGG, and a high level of like game design and mathematical literacy on the part of the player base.
Okay.
Right, because like missing attacks feels bad.
Yeah. This is very interesting.
So like, I'll give you an example. I proposed this in a recent video. I want your bare reaction to this. So missing hits in PoE 2 feels bad, right?
Yeah.
What if plus spell levels, which is currently OP, suppose that you're in mid maps somewhere and you have level 14 fireball on your gem. And then if I add up all of your plus levels from all of your gear, you have another 5 levels from your staff and your amulet and your modifiers and whatever, right? And your fire mastery gem. So your base level of fireball is 15 and your top level of fireball is 20. what if those plus levels just gave you a chance to upcast anywhere between 15 and 20? So that you're never missing, but your hit size varies with whether or not you're rolling that.
Whoa.
That way, stacking additional plus levels has diminishing returns because you are now widening the damage range. You're increasing the size of the possible max hit, but you're not guaranteed that max hit.
I don't love that because it also feels kind of conditional. I would prefer if it was just like the ranges were. That's an interesting idea, though. It's almost like spell accuracy or chance to like.
Well,
isn't it kind of like crit?
Then the follow-up question is like, okay, so then that system exists. What if I then create a stat called magic rating, which is a prefix that can exist on rings and gloves, which increases your percent chance to upcast when your gem level exceeds your base gem level?
That just feels kind of weird.
It's mathematically really hard, but like that is a system that could exist to create diminishing returns and gem levels being valuable.
Yeah.
While still giving the player who wants to always deal level 40 Comet the opportunity to create mirror tier crafted rings and gloves that then give them a 100% chance to hit that. But it requires a much more specific modifiers to achieve that max hit.
I see what you mean. I think it would just be better if they just balance things properly, so to the point where it's not that much stronger to have. That's a very, very interesting idea. But I don't know if I like it. I prefer things that are very, like, I don't know, you equip thing, number go up, build stronger, versus that damage kind of, like, being hidden. Especially in a game of PoE 2 where you can't always see how much damage you're dealing.
Like, what if there were a desecration on a staff that said 60% chance to cast spells as 2 levels higher? Like, what if the tooltip wording were more specific? Or even, like, you know the keyword surpassing in PoE 2? Surpassing chance to fire an additional arrow? What if the modifier were plus 150% surpassing chance to upcast spells?
I wonder if I would like that. I don't know. How do you feel? You feel like this is a more interesting system?
Yeah, but also, like, the average PoE player is already like the deep spreadsheet technical nerd of ARPG players, and I'm even farther off the deep end than the average PoE guide author.
I would really, I would just prefer.
like I'm aware that I'm at the like extreme end of like I can recite the math formula for like the way that defense rating is converted to chance to hit in Diablo 2, and I can do the same thing in Dota and in PoE 2 and in Diablo 4.
I would...
like that's a not normal level of mathematical investment in the game.
No. It's not. I think there are easier ways to balance that. That's an interesting idea. I prefer to just like balance gem levels properly and then like lower the amount and maybe make that mod rarer or something like that. Like that seems slightly more sensible to me. But then maybe you could have like desecrated modifiers that do have weird things like that, but not as like a base system where you're now like level 3 and it's like 14.8% surpassing chance to cast like 2 levels higher, because that's not something you really feel. I like it when you equip something and you feel it, like you're like, oh, +1 level, I can feel the difference like immediately, not chance to do this when that.
So I have an interesting question for you.
Okay.
Because you're PoE 1 knower, and so like evasion is entropic, right?
Yeah.
In PoE 2.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the reset time for that entropy system to restart, where then it reverts to percentage based?
It's
like 8 seconds, right?
Is there a reset time? Okay.
I think it is. So
yeah,
you as the extremely high knowledge. First off, can you just explain for the audience, because otherwise we're going to lose too many people.
So basically,
can you explain what entropic evasion is?
Basically, let's say you have a 90% chance to hit. If you evade 9 hits in a row, the 10th one is guaranteed to hit. So even if you will eventually get hit, it's like pseudo RNG basically, where the more lucky you get, eventually it like guarantees the next hit. I think that explains it. Yeah. And so each one of those first 9 hits still has a 10% chance to hit you. It's just you can't get lucky infinitely. Like it caps your probability. And so the way that this is implemented in PoE, to my understanding, PoE as a franchise, both games,
to my understanding, which may be wrong, is that if you don't take any hits for 8 seconds, it reverts to the beginning of the cycle, meaning it no longer counts up toward the guaranteed hit.
Okay. I didn't
Which
know
means
that.
if you
yeah.
imagine an extremely sparse map, like you can imagine a player who stacks negative pack size, increased monster effectiveness. Okay?
Yeah.
So you're in a map that has like 10 total monsters and they're all rares that are going to absolutely smash your teeth in. Okay? Such a player, you could imagine deliberately walking up to a rare, knowing I have a 90% chance to avoid. I get to engage this one rare. We have, the vision level of combat.
Yeah.
Right? And then I deliberately wait several seconds before engaging the next rare. So that way the entropic system reverts to the beginning.
Okay.
And I'm no longer guaranteed to get my teeth kicked in by the next rare that has 6 mods.
Yeah.
So these systems at the ultra high level of player knowledge, like, when you're talking to Lolcohol, who has 10,000 hours and writes guides for a living, Lolcohol knows this and therefore can do extremely bizarre player behaviors, and the skill ceiling goes way up.
Right.
Like a good example of this from Dota 2 is the same system but in reverse for the critical hits. Right?
Yeah, I do this with like Spirit Breaker, where you like bash the creep, and then it like gets your PRNG up, so that when you attack the next hero, it's like a higher chance to bash, right?
Yeah, exactly. So like, again, to just keep chat on topic, in Dota 2 there's a system where, for example, if you have some on-hit effect like stunning or critting, and there are characters in Dota 2 that are designed to be primarily stunning, like Spirit Breaker does primary stun, or what's the name of Phantom Assassin does huge amounts of crit, right? If you have a, say, 30% chance to stun on hit, and then you stun, your next hit has a chance below 30% chance to stun, and the more non-stuns you deal in a row, the higher chance that your next hit is a stun. Such that it has an average chance of 30% chance to stun over the course of 100 hits. 30 of them would be stuns on average.
But it's like
what that
souls
means
for
is
luck.
that in Dota, and so what that means in the case of Dota 2 is that there is a player behavior where if you know that you're about to engage a team fight, you'll walk up to some neutral enemy and hit them until you've not stunned on 4 or 5 hits in a row, such that your first 2 hits when the team fight breaks out have an extremely high chance to stun the enemy, or an extremely high chance to crit the enemy. In the case of PoE 2, you can imagine that if there were like ultra giga juiced endgame PoE 2 map bosses that are like terrifying and scary, what that might mean is that if crits and stuns worked that way in PoE 2, you could imagine a player like deliberately fighting white mobs until they've non-critted 4 or 5 times in a row, such that their first hit against the map boss is guaranteed to be a crit.
This is advanced. I don't think the game will ever get to that point, though, right? I hope.
Yeah, but like it would create it would not change anything for the average player, because the average player wouldn't know it, and therefore their behavior wouldn't change. And the average chance of a crit would remain the same. So it doesn't change anything for the average player power, but it dramatically increases the mechanical skill ceiling of the game, which for players like me, where like I have 2,500 hours of just campaign practice,
Jesus.
deepening the mechanical skill ceiling is extremely important, which is why Dota 2 is the best game ever for like ultra giga tryhard nerds, because no matter how much Dota 2 you think you understand, you don't.
No. Yeah. Look,
So like, long story short, I want all the math system to be more complicated because I'm complicated.
You want the game to cater to you. Right.
Believe it or not, gamer wants game good for specifically
No way.
them.
Never
Who knew?
I've never heard anything like it.
I've never heard anyone profess to want game good for them.
I actually need to go. I need to go chow. Should we hop you over to Blazeworks? Or what do we think? Blaze? Yeah.
Up to you.
Let's go see Blaze.
Blaze is...
Yeah. Okay. That was a thoroughly enjoyable, extremely nerdy conversation. I'll see. Yeah, like a few people said they want to see it uploaded to YouTube, so I'll think about doing that. Just need to see where the start and end is. Yeah. Okay. Good. Then let's chat in a bit. I'll be back on Monday and probably playing this game.
Okay.
I'm probably gonna harass you for help and stuff. 13 errors, super into this. Yeah, let me just also before I do that, let's just give a shout out to Crimson Cast. Crimson Cast is rad. He is a speedrunner and caster
And graph producer and math aficionado
There you
and
go.
giant dork and good haircut haver.
True. Any pets?
And all the other things.
Cat.
Any pets? No, I don't have. I have a houseplant.
There you go. Houseplant owner. Yeah. Okay, good. Well, we chat later. Thanks for that.
Yep.
Good. Cheers, man. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Bye.
Peace.
Okay, that was great. I love chatting to Crimson. He's rad. That guy's great. I'm gonna